Her most recent research focuses on the connection between trauma and narrative structures in world literature, with a specific attention to women writers, migrant narratives, and the global novel. And she's also principal investigator in the international project Traumas of Migration and Public Health Industry. Welcome also to Derek Duncan, who is professor of Italian at the University of St. Andrews. He has published extensively on Italian literature and film, particularly on intersections of sexuality, gender, and of race, ethnicity in a transnational framework. We are confident that his theoretical and methodological contribution will be crucial to today's session. Thank you, Derek. He was founding editor of the Cultural Studies issue of Italian Studies, of the acclaimed series Transnational Italian Cultures, and also co-editor of Transnational Modern Languages, a handbook. He is currently interested in exploring Italian cultural production as a set of vernacular material practices extending beyond the peninsula itself and in the multiple legacies of migration from Italy. His current research project on this argument is founded by a major research fellowship awarded by the Levelium Trust. And finally, many thanks to Jenny McPhee for agreeing to participate in Before Ferrante. Jenny McPhee is the author of the novels The Center of Things, No Ordinary Matter, and A Man of No Moon, and co-authored Girls, Ordinary Girls, and Their Extraordinary Pursuits. Her translations include works by the authors Anna Banti, Massimo Bontempelli, Cristina Campo, Fausta Cialente, Beppe Fenoglio, Natalia Ginzburg, Primo Levi, Curzio Malaparte, Elsa Morante, Anna Maria Artese, and others. She teaches literary translation at New York University and Princeton University, and she is currently the recipient of a John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Fellowship. So, before opening the discussion with these special guests, I would like to say a few words about the title we choose for this seminar series. What Before Ferrante means and why did we choose this title? Well, because looking at what came before Ferrante, indeed, and at how certain dynamics of dissemination and recognition within and beyond national borders are repeated in the history of the 20th century, allows us to possibly reveal new and unexpected relationship between female authors and their international readership in their time. And this is crucial since we talk about authors often at the center of critical readings full of prejudice, marginality, provinciality, exponents of a sort of a minor literature or of a sentimental or pathetic literature, writers who use forms from the past, outdated, or again, writers who are not imitated, not even discussed by their peers, and so on. Therefore, looking before Ferrante with a transnational approach allows us to force these interpretations and their boundaries, and to adopt a broader systemic vision that gives justice to the experiences, the trajectories of these female authors. But there is also another reason for this title that evokes an author, Elena Ferrante, who has not been the subject of a single seminar, but in fact has accompanied us in every one of our weekly meetings. And it is indeed necessary to assess the effects of Ferrante's success on the trajectories of these authors, of these female authors today, on their rediscovery in the extreme contemporary. This is, in fact, a kind of a boomerang effect that we can observe both in academia regarding studies and conferences dedicated to this subject, and in the world of publishing and translations, therefore also from a commercial sales and public visibility point of view. And this is why we're so happy to be able to discuss it today with our guests who have different backgrounds and who will give us their opinion on this project and on the issues that have arisen in recent weeks. So thank you again for being here with us. To start our discussion, I would perhaps suggest, again, starting from the title itself, and therefore maybe I would like to ask Tiziana de Rogatis, what is her opinion on the so-called Ferrante effect in contemporary Italian literature, but maybe also in Italian critics. So as an expert of Ferrante, can you give us like a general overview on this topic? And perhaps this question is the same one I would like to ask Jenny McPhee as a translator. So do you observe a Ferrante effect that influences the translation and dissemination of Italian female authors abroad today? Thank you very much. Tiziana, we can't hear you.
Should be fine now?
Perfect.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolina. And I would like, first of all, to express my many thanks to Dr. Mara Travella and Dr. Carolina Rossi for this gorgeous roundtable and for the whole project of mapping Italian women writers in translation. I would also like to thank the Center for Study of Contemporary Women's Writing, and particularly my dearest friend, Adalgisa Giorgio. Coming to your question, Carolina, yes, we had and we still have with Ferrante a consolidation, in my perspective, of an aesthetic paradigm that was not invented by Ferrante, but certainly brought by her to a very high degree of collective and global awareness. And this happened not only among readers, but also in the field of research. That is very important in order to fight against these vast, huge areas of bias and prejudice you were talking before. What are the basic points of this aesthetic paradigm? The storytelling, the fluidity, the importance, the value of storytelling, the ability of create a story, a narration with a great fluidity, and the hypergender, the ability of mixing together different genders that was inherited by Morante, basically, and hybridization of high and low materials, high materials from the high tradition of novels and the low materials of storytelling, sentimental storytelling, emotional storytelling, and finally, something that is quite considered an objection in the classical paradigm of academic in Italy, pathos, emotion. All these elements, in fact, indeed, are considered heretical in the Italian landscape, in the cultural high Italian landscape, which is the university, the Italian university canon of writers that must be read or not, that must be preserved in the times or not. And so it's considered heretical with respect to a certain highbrow aesthetic. According to this highbrow aesthetic, the narrative flow, its immersiveness are absolute evil. The bad tendency, the bad possibility, the pleasure of storytelling must be always frustrated and atoned for. The fluidity, the storytelling always coincides with readability, and readability in turn coincides always with banality. Other area of this terrifying paradigm is the illusion that the illusion of the narrative surface must be always scrambled throughout the modernist or postmodern techniques, ellipsis, analysis, irony. The fractures must be exhibited, not hidden. And so, according to this highbrow code, the scars matter much more than the tissue that forms them. It's important to clarify that this highbrow paradigm is in itself a vertical hierarchy, and consequently, in order to exist, this vertical hierarchy must generate a low dimension of middle brow and low brow. And what Ferrante, what the new paradigm of My Brilliant Friend forced us to see is the importance in this time, in the globalized time, of this kind of writing, structured by the storytelling, the power of storytelling, of narrativity, even on the surface, on this plausible narrative surface, tending towards the effect of reality, but also split into a double bottom from which a tension, a pathos, ambivalence emerges. So a transparency of writing that is sabotaged by the opacity of something that comes below, that is an area of tension, of pathos, of vulnerability. This is a paradigm, an aesthetic paradigm that is not created by Ferrante, but the global success of Ferrante makes the paradigm arrive on a solidity, on a conscious level that was never achieved by any writer. Even Elsa Morante, that is a greater writer actually comparative to Ferrante, has never achieved this, because she never achieved this global success, this global perception that is very, very important in order to free all women writers from prejudice. I'm also thinking about Adichie, for example. All the Adichie career and writing would have been impossible without the global perspective that freed her from the Nigerian canon that was quite patriarchal, as the Italian is. So to close this my part of this little contribution of this little moment in your question to answer completely, it is important in any case to say that Ferrante was very important in order to create a new canon, a new paradigm in which many women writers can recognize themselves. But at the same, and it is very important as a support to fight against this monological paradigm of the highbrow. But at the same time, we must not relegate the impact of the quadrilogy and this new paradigm only to the area of gender studies or women's studies, because it is something more. It's something that has marginalized the highbrow standard in Italy, has marginalized not only women writers, but also many male Italian writers, such as Levi, that not surprisingly emerged thanks to the Ferrante effect with translation, Cassola, Bassani. I'm talking about really great male Italian writers that have suffered the same and a very similar form of marginalization, because they express a very similar readability, storytelling, and they are not close to any experimental issues or highbrow prejudice or bias.
Thank you.
I hope.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's really interesting what you said, and I hope we'll be able to explore more during the discussion. Also have in mind this contraposition between literary dignity and commercial success, which is maybe at the center of, I don't know, this is an issue that divides the critic. But yes, maybe Jenny McPhee, if you want to say something about your experience as an author and translator of Italian literature.
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much for this. This is really fascinating, and I'm so glad that it is happening. And thank you, Tiziana, for those really interesting remarks. Lot to think about there. So I can come at this really as a practicing translator and sort of what I've seen happen in the US in terms of the translating women versus men. So in my early career, what I was offered was, pretty exclusively men authors to translate. So then at a certain point I don't know when, Maya Tal-Rudzinski, I don't know if you guys know who she is. She's the Women in Translation. She has a Women in Translation project. And based on, there was a lot of data coming out about how much literature and translation occurs in the English language market. So and this in England and the US and Australia, out of all the books that are translated, there's the famous number, the 3% number. So of all of our books, only 3%, and that has recently gone down to 2%, are in translation. And then of that, of course, it's all mostly European languages and so on. But of that 3%, 20%, I now see it's gotten better, up to 30, but 20% are by women writers. So, and even in places like, say, Japan, where actually they publish equally men and women, still the US was publishing 80% men over male Japanese writers over female. So there's this just enormous bias. To the point where at a certain point in my career, I think it was like in 2015 or something, I decided as an act, I haven't kept to it exclusively, but I decided that I would only translate women going forward. So at the same, then, the Ferrante effect has been just extraordinary. So in terms of who's reading, who's reading Italian literature, and I don't want to dismiss either Jhumpa Lahiri. So Jhumpa Lahiri also has done a lot in terms of just exposing the English-speaking audiences to the incredible wealth of Italian authors, past and present. Her book of Italian short stories was really kind of revelatory. And so, now, if I want to, I recently did Menzogne e Sortileggio by Morante. We're bringing out a new translation of La Storia. I had never heard, this is how horrible it is, I had never heard of Alba de Cespedes. And, what a career that woman had and how important she was to Italian literature. And she disappeared. She was just erased. And Elena Ferrante in Frantumaglia and other writings has really brought these writers back, and not only to an Italian audience, but to an American audience. And so her Forbidden Notebook did extremely well. It's about to come out in paperback. Menzogne e Sortileggio, so Lies and Sorcery. I mean, that is a really tough book. I mean, it's high, talk about high-low, Tiziana, and everything that is going on in there. That book has been selling like hotcakes in the US. I mean, it's a phenomenon. So there's just now this groundswell of interest in Ginzburg. Always, Natalia Ginzburg, she always had an audience, but her audience has just gone exponential since. And, now we're looking, Paola Mazzino, I'm really interested in. When Jhumpa did her book of short stories, she asked me what I wanted to translate. And I said, only the women. And I discovered, Anna Banti, she's incredible. Fausta Cialente. I mean, there are just so many of these women that have come back. And as I was saying earlier, I am a little concerned about the present and contemporary women authors. And is the Ferrante effect having an effect for them? I mean, I know that recently a book that's very influenced by Ferrante by, it's called, in English, they called it The Cursed Friend, but and it's by this woman, Beatrice Salvioni. That's coming out here, very based on, very influenced by Ferrante, but otherwise I don't see the forward. I see the back look, but I don't see the forward look so much, which is concerning to me.
Thank you. Actually, you say that Alba de Cespedes disappeared at a certain point, and this has a lot to do with probably a methodological issue underlined before Ferrante. So the intention to map these women writers in the transnational field to remove them from this present invisibility, possibly highlighting a presence in the past, or vice versa, naturally. And so Derek Duncan, as an expert in translation studies, I would like to ask you, what are, in your opinion, the possible links between a transnational view and a gender view? How these aspects like dialogue in your experience?
And maybe, sorry for introduce, but maybe you can say something about the title, but I think you have something to say about.
Yeah, first of all, what I'd like to say is to thank you, Mara and Carolina, for putting together this incredible series of events. I'm going to miss them. My Thursdays won't be the same. It's been a great pleasure to listen to all the contributors. And I think the first point I would want to make is that in the way you've organised the series, you've actually performed a great act of transnational scholarship in itself, because you've brought together a truly international series of panelists. I think very often people in the Anglophone world become obsessed with a kind of binational paradigm. It's all about the relationship between English and Italian, or, you know, the Anglophone world and Italy. But I think your contributors, although we've been using English as a lingua franca, the fact that they've come from so many different national contexts, diverse national contexts, they've opened up these kind of histories of the authors that have been talking about in ways which I think is a really important statement in itself. And I think that opens up lots of really interesting kind of possibilities for future, picking up a bit on Jenny's point about where things might actually go in the future. But in terms of the project itself, I mean, you can maybe say something about that, because it involves us both really in a kind of a moment in Dublin a couple of years ago.
Yes, maybe yes. I have to say that first of all, I met Derek Duncan and in a summer school in Dublin, and was Cecilia Brioni and Claude Bro that organized it. And we were working on how to work with literature and other techniques interrelated to literature. And I have this idea of working on women translation, and we were in the same group. And the idea was creating a map on a website and working with technology and the technology literature. And yes, but we didn't have a title. So after a discussion, Derek Duncan said, "What about Before Ferrante?" for the idea that we wanted to map this trajectory before Ferrante, because we can really see this movement that bring Ferrante out of Italy to a semi-peripheral language to a very central language and a very central publishing market, and coming back after in Italy, like, okay, our big brother says that this is good, so it is good for us too. So yes, and after I was talking with Carolina, and this idea we have on working on translation from a transnational perspective, and this project we work on in Dublin remain in my heart, really. and Before Ferrante was always in my mind, and after I found Carolina, and after we found the possibility of Center for the Study of Women's Writing, who give us this possibility. So yes.
And this is the reason why, I'm sorry, this is also the reason why it is so important for us, the map thing. This is like the visual you were describing really well, no? This movement of Ferrante, but a lot of Italian female authors who have had these like movements beyond and within national borders. So this would like to be like a global map, not a global, but like a transnational map of these movements.
I mean, the points, I think this is a great opportunity for us to be able to discuss these things with the participants as well. So I'd just like to make 3 observations really quickly, 3 points of contact that have struck me over the seminars. First of all, to go right back to Anita Kloss's presentation on Sibilla Aleramo, right at the start of the series, I was really struck by the fact that she commented on the fact that Aleramo was very good friends with the filmmaker Carmine Galloni and his Polish wife. And of course, this facilitated her translation into Polish, and there was a really fascinating history around there. But more than anything, I was fascinated by the fact that Aleramo was intimately involved in the world of cinema. And it struck me that all of the writers that have been discussed were never working in isolation. And, you know, with people like Deleda, for example, we sometimes fall into the stereotype of thinking that they probably were, but actually were involved in a very rich multimedia cultural environment, and they were cultural practitioners on a number of different levels. And I think that's one thing that could be teased out. The second point I would want to bring out is that so often we are talking not just about works which were translated once, but which were translated into several different languages. There might have been multiple translations. Sometimes authors were translating themselves. The question of authorship is really interesting here. And to pick up on one of the authors that Jenny mentioned, Anna Banti, and I might say a bit more about Anna Banti later. Anna Banti was also a translator. And this kind of ties into Tiziana's point too. I mean, one of the authors that she translated was Virginia Woolf, Jacob's Room. But that wasn't the only thing she translated. And I think to think about some of these writers as active translators and involved in publishing on a different level is really interesting as well. The third point I would want to make is that so often the history of these translations opens up a kind of hidden cultural history of the 20th and 21st century. I was really struck by this fact of something that I read recently in relation to Banti, that the peak of the translations of her most famous novel, Artemisia, occurred in the late 80s and early 90s. And that is clearly on the back, I would say, of academic research and public interest in women's writing. And it's not for nothing that there was that interest at that point. So I think the history of the translation could tell us different stories as well. And I think Jenny's point about the Ferrante effect and how that is rippling in different and some perhaps problematic directions is something that we can kind of like explore further. So I think the question of not just whether or not writers do get translated, but when they get translated is something that we might want to explore more fully. And I think it will give us different answers to different questions, but I'd like to pause there.
Yes, thank you, Derek, for these three points you mentioned. And yes, maybe after I will share some reflection on this different series and on the geographical area we were to, but because you mentioned and the Polish translation of Aleramo, but really I think we had different languages and different perspective in this seminar series that allow us to think in another way. But after that, I have a question in the chat for Tiziana de Rogatis. So maybe from Zobeida Uchati, and yes, please make question. If you want, you can just write down it in the chat. So for Tiziana de Rogatis, there is a question about your approach on the unraveling the layers of meaning in Elena Ferrante's novels, and how do you navigate the intricate web of themes, characters, and cultural context to offer insightful analysis? Maybe, yes, I think that we are here, and a lot of people is interested in Ferrante because not always have the possibility to speak about. So maybe just a little answer on this.
Yes. Well, there were really many layers, and was very difficult for me to get free from some academic bias at the beginning when I was writing Elena Ferrante keywords. My first chapter of the book, of my book in particular, was really hard because I was argumenting on this novel that is at the same time popular and brilliant. And so discovering these many layers was a way to get conscious of this prejudice that I interiorized in my previous career. And well, these layers, we can divide these layers in two areas, basically. One is very deeply, strongly connected to Napoli. And in many cases, even people from Napoli cannot really, talking about all the Ferrante's production, even the first three novels before the quadrilogy, many aspects of this Neapolitan area cannot really be deciphered from all Neapolitan people, even. I mean that people from middle class, from high bourgeoisie cannot really understand many aspects, many mechanisms of Rione Luzzatti, because Neapolitan people are quite divided in cases sexually, even if the Napoli is a very popular and hybrid town. In this way, I was quite helped by the fact that I am Neapolitan. So I worked on my ignorance, but also ignorance as a middle class person by Napoli. But at the same time, I could decipher many aspects that were quite difficult to understand for the other. But at the same time, that is not really the point. There are these layers, and they're very, very important to understand it. But at the same time, Ferrante was always working about this ability of transcending the particular of Neapolitan area into a universal context, which is universalized by the emotion, by the pathos, by her research of this emotional impact and the narrative techniques that help in this very popular technique, actually, inherited by the feuilleton, by the low level of narration. So in this way, I was really astonished by a lady, by a Scottish little village in Great Britain. She told me this, that the mean and ferocious atmosphere of Rione Luzzatti was really the same of her little village in Scotland. And she was immigrating in Australia, was able to understand completely that atmosphere. Even she was not able to decipher every aspect of Rione Luzzatti that was even not capable to be deciphered from Neapolitan people. So this is the global dimension of Ferrante, is simply an hyper-intensification of the universal tone of the great classical novel that are able to transcend and to make archetypes on very rooted and very visceral themes, like in quadrilogies. So this was my support in order to survive these many layers.
Thank you, Professor De Rogatis. It's really the force of some books and some literature that can just make from a town, from a city, a paradigm that can just change. You can change the place, but it's always the same paradigm, no? And yes, I was thinking on Macondo, of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. There are some yes, ambience and home and little city that became really an image for everyone. And coming back to on this question of the languages on the center, on the semi-periphery and periphery of languages, I was thinking on how was important that this translation in English was so successful, because maybe if it was in another language, not so important and not so linked to power, we can just have the same effect. And in fact, we were in Spain with D'eramo, we were in Sweden with Deledda, in France with the Cespedes, and in Germany the last time with Morante. And I was thinking the interesting thing of this series of seminar was really to go from the nation that is, and the language who is in a semi-peripheral space, according to Abraham de Zwaan and Johan Helborn said in their studies, going from this semi-peripheral situation, from another semi-peripheral situation, and from a language like Italian and to French, for example, who is this power linked to Paris and to what it means in Europe, the French language. And we can just say that the same thing happens with Goliarda Sapienza, for example. So the success of her book in Italy has bring back a sort of effect that demonstrates to the Italian public that this is a huge novel, in an important novel. And from this perspective, the risk I would like to say here with all of you is we can just observe these trajectories from a European or USA perspective, and we have the risk to not understand the Japanese or Arabic or less common language we study with or we deal with. So for me, this is a question in collecting data, for example, about translation, that it's really important. I think the next time we will organize maybe something on this, the importance for thinking on the languages that are out of this system. It's really, really important, because we are working with a category, the women's writing, who has been really put in a peripheral space or a subcategory. No, and now if we work with translation of women writers and we do the same error, the same mistake, I think it's important to change this perspective and change this paradigm of center and periphery. I don't know if you have something to say about it. Sorry if I take some minutes for saying this.
I would just support you. It's extremely important that because the translation from all languages, and we've limited what we read, the voices we hear, because we basically only, when we do translate, I'm speaking about the English speaking world, we translate so little, and then I think it's something like 85% of that is from European languages. So we're basically limiting our world. So, and the more we can do to counteract that in, things like this, the better.
Can I just add a little comment on that? I think I would agree with both of you, Jenny and Mara. I mean, I think also attention to the kind of work you're doing, it kind of really problematizes the notion of world literature, because world literature is very often literature which is available in the English language, which is kind of like really limiting. And, you know, a more genuine form of world literature would pay attention to the diversity of translation, you know, as a cultural practice across the globe, and think about reception. Obviously, in specific places, it's not to kind of homogenize reception in any kind of reductive way, but just to be attentive to the multiplicity of readings and voices, as Jenny has intimated, that currently, you know, are not available.
Also, sorry to get back to data, because, you know, we're just all data these days, but you know what, in other countries, that their numbers in translation are anywhere from, you know, 35 to 80% of what they translate, their books that are published. Of that number, what they're translating from English is so high, and it's that too is really disturbing. So, you know, there's got to be movements to counteract what's going on.
If I may say something, Mara, I don't know if we can, or better to go on. No, just I want to enforce what Jenny and Derek are saying. I completely agree with both of you, but at the same time, speaking from the Italian women perspective, also women scholars perspective, yes, it's true that there is a danger of obscurity on the English imperialism, but at the same time, we must never forget that we are making this roundtable because of the English translation of Elena Ferrante, and also studying together Elena Ferrante, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. What was striking to me was that even for Adichie, would have been really very difficult to emerge if she wouldn't have been connected to the English curriculum. It is not just only that for colonialism heritage she was writing in English. She is mother tongue Igbo, but she was writing in English. That is a primary language in Nigeria. No, this is also an habit of connection, of discussions, of dimensions that can be opened only by the transnational perspective. When you are a woman writer or woman scholar in a patriarchal, peripheral nation of the world, we must accept this, because before Ferrante would have been an impossible thought without this global perspective. That is also a translation, a change, a metamorphosis into another world in which you can lose a lot. But at the same time, yes, we must struggle against this imperialistic danger of global, of English language, of the Englishes, but we must also be grateful.
Tiziana, I'm just going to push back a little bit here, because we cannot be grateful to the patriarchy and the gatekeepers in the US for Ferrante, because they did not want to publish Ferrante. And I actually did propose to Knopf way early on to publish her. And they said no. All the gatekeepers said no. Europa had to found their own publishing company in the US in order to publish Ferrante. So it's these subversive moves that actually need to happen in order for then us to benefit from the patriarchy or, you know, imperialism or whatever. But we can't give credit to them for Ferrante.
To them, who?
It was Europa, Italians. It was the Italian publishing company that founded Europa in the US in order to publish Ferrante. Because they knew that she would have success there.
Yes, absolutely. But I mean, they had to work because it's really a peripheral language. They had to invent this, but at the same time, this was possible in that world because in that world there is a more inclusive idea of aesthetic paradigm and writing expression. And so when you were able to overcome the marketing strategy that is also a big chain, that is not patriarchal, but the marketing strategy that can be a chain even stronger than the patriarchal, then you can achieve something that not only in Italy, but also in France, in Spain, in all the European nations that are much more built on the hierarchy of the highbrow, you would have never achieved in that, at least in that way. So that's why I was talking also about Adisha, that is writing in English language, but if she would not overcome the Nigerian borders, she would have never become such a great writer. And I mean, and she was writing in English automatically, so that's not just a question of translation and market, just a question of a much broader perspective that comes from the English Anglophone culture for many reasons. I mean, but market question is a question, of course, I agree with you.
Yes, I think if I can just say something on this discussion, I think it's really interesting the fact that, for example, some books of Italian women writers in USA or in Great Britain are, for example, introduced by other women writings from that country. For example, I think on Sally Rooney introducing Natalia Ginzburg. There is a sort of double effect that from in a certain way, and I was, for being clear, I was not saying that is bad, the situation of Ferrante phenomenon. I was nothing say that. I was just nothing that is important to keep in mind the importance of go somewhere out of the center. And yes, but for coming back on what I was saying, I think that is interesting because women writers in their country can just make a little bit of a change in their trajectory and in their career. For example, making an introduction on Natalia Ginzburg and as Sally Rooney, that are very, very different writers, but they are together. And here is the book is a space where Sally Rooney can just give something to Natalia Ginzburg and take something from that. This is, I think, on the publishing market, it's really interesting because once they decided to publish an Italian women writers, they are looking for a women writer who can make the introduction. So it's something that the published market as learn, as understand that maybe it's a good way to sell the book.
So I agree with you, Mara, but I do wonder, again, how long the phenomenon will last. I mean, it's sort of like Hollywood. They say a woman director will make a incredible film, and then the next woman director will go to get funding, and they say, oh, well, female stories don't sell. So, I just wonder if this is going to be a continuing phenomenon. I see the phenomenon now. I see that it's really working. More is being published. Female stories. Okay, so for example, Ferrante, it's all about two women, women's stories. The domestic novel is often, as Tiziana was saying before, it's seen as something that's not legitimate in the canon because it's the domestic. And this is what Ferrante, what Morante and Ginzburg, and they were so brilliant at looking at the domestic in order to comment on the general politics sociology, everything. So they've raised up Ferrante, and then all of these women have raised up, and Ferrante talks herself about how Morante she was like, oh my God, I can write a novel in which women are the protagonists and their stories and their lives, and it can be legitimate because she had read Morante's Menzogne e Sortileggio. And so, that phenomenon and that effect, I hope will continue. I don't know that it will. I don't mean to be cynical about it, but there is this effect, but I don't know how long it will keep going. And that's my worry.
I just wanted to say something about these women's stories. I found interesting how, to reflect on how these books are presented. What do the prefaces, the covers of these books allude to? So we are often faced with these stereotyped visions of women's stories to emphasize the fact that we are dealing with an alternative literature to the dominant one, like a second-class literature, women's literature, actually. And this is also a commercial label, as Mara was saying. And I don't know, this label of commercial literature that is applied to female authors, it made me think if Ferrante's success also increases the visibility of an author like, Morante, who is linked to Ferrante, or if, for example, Sally Rooney, a preface seen by Sally Rooney sells more book by Natalia Ginzburg. What is the limit between poor literature and the marketing? Is it, literary dignity and commercial success? What is the? I'm repeating what I was saying at the very beginning, but to me this is a really interesting question, because these women literature, women's stories, it's perceived as something often as something really, really commercial, but the two levels are really linked to the one to another. I don't know if you have something. If you have an opinion or something to say about it, I'm really, I don't know, it's probably a curiosity of mine.
Carolina, I was always stricken by the popular quotation from the Italian cover of quadrilogy from the very beginning, no? There was quite plainly a game, no? A quotation saying, I'm selling you, I'm proposing you something that is not ashamed to be popular. And I think that this is the intermediate border that is very important, because popular is not, again, only a question for women writers. Popular was always the destiny of novel, of the great novel. Dickens and Manzoni were dealing with popular when Manzoni, the greatest Italian novelist of 19th century, when Manzoni was asserting that he was looking for a public, a simple public, together with a very clever public, and his novel, The Betrothed, I Promessi Sposi, was written for this different public. And he was talking about the destiny of the novel structure. And Morante, she is the great interpreter of this, no? Morante publishing a history novel in an economic edition, struggling with the editor, with the publishing industry for this, thinking while she was writing to achieve a popular success that is at the same time a very elaborate success, a success also for a very cultured reader. They could be at the same time nowadays in the 20th century a popular reader. The popular reader now is not divided in a case, as in Manzoni time, to the culture reader. They can be the same person. When I read the first time the quadrilogy for a personal reason connected to a friendship with other women friend of mine in Napoli, was so important for me that every page I was saying to me, I'm not going to write anything about this book. This book is just mine. It's only mine. And that's because at the beginning, I wasn't thinking about writing on the quadrilogy. I started to write on the quadrilogy just in order to protect Ferrante, stand up for Ferrante, because I wrote on Troubling Love, and I was having a revolt, a rebellion on the idea that Ferrante was the greatest writer of the first three novels, and now that was just the rubbish of the marketing. No, I had to stand up. That's why I wrote on the quadrilogy. But I mean, I had this experience on my skin that was that popular in the novel structure, as Morante always stated, can be the highest level of achievement for the novel genre. And women writers in nowadays are the first interpreters of this destiny for many reasons, because they deal much more today with categories such as trauma and vulnerability, and so they can write on the minimum details, on the little destiny of everybody of us, no, as history, a novel can demonstrate on Morante. Speaking about Morante, sorry. Stop.
No, thank you for your answering. I really think that, I mean, this popularity of them makes these books like less appealing to critics, and this is a huge limit. Like it's something like I found every time interesting to discuss.
It's terrifically gendered though here, because if it's written by a woman, it's called commercial women's fiction. If it's written by Jonathan Franzen, it's literature. So, I mean, and he's just basically writes the domestic novel, but he is in a whole other category. And, so I think there's a lot of just genderedness going on here.
Can I just offer a sort of curious little example, again, in relation to Anna Banti's, the translation of Artemisia, and I think it'd be interesting to have Jenny's perspective on this particularly. When it was first published in English in the late 80s, the translator was actually credited on the cover. It was your point, Carolina, that reminded me of this. But when it was reissued in a more popular edition in the early 2000s, on the cover, the sort of byline was prefaced by Susan Sontag, and the translator became invisibilized on the new edition. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that, Jenny, about the kind of like the degree of authorship, in a sense, that might be afforded, to the translator, and the acknowledgement of the presence of the translation. Very often, a female translator translating a female author, which is part of this kind of like network of distribution, circulation, all these other questions that Mara and Caroline have been touching on.
Well, I could talk on that subject for a very long time, but in any case, the invisibility of the translator, but especially the feminization of the translator, so therefore is made invisible because the translator is the helpmeet to the author, is supposed to make herself disappear in the glory of the author. And we just have to credit Ferrante with drawing extreme attention to this fact, and how by not being the author, she is forefronting the translator. Of course, poor Anne was like, oh my gosh, she's the face in the English speaking world, and had to become extremely visible. But that was, I think, very purposeful, because I think Ferrante has real doubt about the whole idea of authorship and authority, author, and to bring more to the idea that literature is a collaboration, And we wouldn't have literature without translation and collaboration between translators. And as I guess it was you, Derek, making the point. I mean, being part of the translators, so many authors are translators. I mean, that was just a very sort of typical, normal thing, because there's nothing that teaches writing better than actually being a translator. Ginzburg translated Proust, they were all translating all the time. And, that's a really important conversation. And the fact that it's more in the US, I think, than elsewhere, but that the ideal translator, you wouldn't even know they exist, is like a weird concept. And so in my career alone, fighting to get my name on the cover is like huge, much less paid, So it's very gender and very interesting, and great topic for discussion.
It's, for example, looking at the publishing market in Italy, I have to say that, for example, little publishing houses like NN Editore or publishing houses that are minor, in a certain way, they let more space to translator. For example, the translator can, at the end of the book, write a little postface saying how was like translating these books, give some insight for understanding the plot or the style of the author and so on. And in the contrary, I think yes, in a bigger publishing houses, translator is just someone who you just give them the work, and then the work came back not directly to the publishing houses, but it has a chain from editors and other reviewer and so on. So the translator never see the author, for example. So this is not a rule. This is not just, I can just say that from my perspective in Italian publishing market, there are more attention in a little and medium publishing houses than in the big ones. But I think we are going, thanks also to translation studies, to this to give this visibility to translator in a certain way, that academia and translation studies and translation history gives a certain real importance in the network, for example, of author and the study on translator, and for giving back their importance, for example, in a certain way to let possible to translate some books.
Yes, and also I think this is it's very important to focus on the idea of authorship, of writers, of translators. I mean, these the public existence of these female writers in this case, and the network, because these women writers are often seen as isolated exceptions. So squeezed into this category of women's writing, and it's important to reconstruct these networks, to place them in at the end in the same context as their male colleagues, So this is probably a reflection about literary canon, but also about visibility, invisibility, reconstructing networks as this effect, and it's a methodological issue to me.
It's also very ironic, because in the US market, at least, and I'm sure this is true in Europe too, that I think it's something like 85% of who buys books are women.
Yes.
So, it's then marginalized into women's writing in these categories of sort of the purgatory. It's, It's a very strange phenomenon.
I was thinking, coming back to the idea that the Ferrante didn't let the public know her identity. I was thinking on the last seminar we have done with Morante, and the idea that our panelists bring to us that was really Monica Zanardo, for example, who was really interesting for me, because after the Strega Prize, you can see really a change in the Morante posture. In the sorry, and as I have this term in French, that the habitus of Ferrante in the landscape, in the publishing landscape, she changed because she wanted to construct her identity after the prize. And the other thing I was thinking on, for example, when Derek Duncan speak about Anna Banti and this idea of the first translation in 80 and the other translation, it's really interesting because for D'eramo is the same things, and it goes with, for example, the 80s, the 70s and the 80s, a moment where the Italian, the women movement, Italian women movement, has a global resonance in every nation, and this is a moment of collective work for women. And we have, for example, translation of D'eramo made by a collective in France, and collective translator group. And it's really interesting because we can say that networks also goes with a moment in the history where people start to make connection, thanks also to historical movements and so on.
Can I respond to that a bit, Mara, and also pick up on a comment that I see is in chat about Anna Banti being a pseudonym. It's a pseudonym of Lucilla Presti Longhi, and her husband Roberto Longhi was very much responsible for the rediscovery, the revaluation of Artemisia Gentileschi. What I think is super interesting, and this is another aspect of cultural translation, the broader cultural history, is the fact that art historians very often reference Artemisia and the work of Anna Banti when they're actually writing on the painting of Artemisia Gentileschi, because there's been a huge feminist reevaluation of her work. And I think it is kind of super interesting that it's this pseudonym, this kind of self-created female identity, which having an impact on how feminist art historians are not just reevaluating the painting itself, but recreating creating a different form of historiography. And it kind of goes back to Tiziana's earlier point about kind of like sort of middle brow genre writing. I mean, Anna Banti sort of goes against this a bit. I mean, she is willfully difficult. But that willful difficulty does kind of like translate into interesting ways. And I think if we're looking also more broadly at the influence, if you like, of women writers, women in translation, I think it's super interesting to kind of explore them laterally and not just in the field of literature as well. And I think Banti gives a super interesting example of that, and particularly because it's the pseudonym of Lucilla Presti, which has become famous. I just thought I'd want to comment that again as a side example.
Thank you. So we're, I don't know if we're like probably almost at the end of our session. Yes, we don't have any question. Obviously, if you can, like, you can raise your, if you want, you can raise your hand or write in chat.
There is
okay.
There is
just thank you, Derek. There is an answer. Okay, Mara, what do you think?
Yes, I think if no one has more question, we can just finish this incredible roundtable. Sorry if I speak too much. Sorry, Derek, if I didn't let you speak. I haven't seen. I was just thinking that there are a lot of things that came out on this seminar series and reflection. We can just, as Jenny McPhee was saying before, we can just talk a lot about these themes. And after saying you goodbye, I would really thank you for being here. I would really like to thank you, Carolina, for this seminar series, for the work we did together. It was really, really, really interesting, and it was fantastic to work with you as a colleague, but as a friend too. And yes, because we are speaking on Ferrante friendship and something really, really important. And thank you, Derek Duncan, again for the idea of this title and for being there the first time we were thinking about this project. And thank you, Jenny McPhee, for let us enter in your world as a translator, and with your perspective on the USA panorama and USA market. We didn't know a lot. And thank you, Tiziana de Rogatis, for your work on Elena Ferrante, for your reflection you share with us this evening. Thank you, really.
Thank you very much.
Both. It's been great.
So I hope we'll be soon we'll have the opportunity to discuss these topics again, perhaps even in person. It's been really, really our pleasure. So thank you, and thank you, Mara. Without you, it wouldn't have been the same. And thanks again to the Center for the Study of Contemporary Women's Writing that has hosted us. So this is a goodbye. Thank for our public. Thank you for...
Grazie ragazze. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Grazie mille.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye, Jenny. Bye, Derek. Thank you so much.